Yes, today I would like to invite you to delve with me into the realm of biodiversity, and specifically in fermented foods. But I will start sharing just a little bit of background about myself. So growing up, I spent a lot of time outdoors and in nature, and I felt a really strong connection to the natural world around me. And that's also why I decided to study biology. However, during growing up, I actually encountered a growing or increasing disconnect between my values to care for nature and just general modern actions in life. And this is, I guess, apparently particularly apparent in a phenomenon called climate change. And I think you're all aware of that, and you might have all your concerns and personal disconnect there. So I wanted to actually align my actions with my values more and address this issue also through my work as a microbiologist. And basically studying the drivers for climate change, I realized that the food system is one of the major drivers of climate change. And it's actually quite shocking to me that even if we were to stop fossil fuel emissions today, we would still not be able to reach our climate goals unless we would also change the food system. So you might be wondering by now what is wrong with the food system. And the main problem, there are two main problems in my eyes, and the first one is that the design of the food system is linear, not only resulting in food, but also in immense amounts of food waste. So there's 1/3 of all food that is produced that is wasted, and that doesn't even include other additional side streams that are produced along the way. And the second major problem is the inefficiency, especially in animal-derived products. So 60% of the carbon emission from the food system are actually coming from animal production, and 80% of the land that is used in the food system is used for animal growth. But only 20% of the nutrients in our diets are provided through animal-derived products. So there is a huge imbalance and inefficiency, on top of course, other ethical concerns in regards to animal welfare. If we look at natural systems, in contrast to the linear design food system, natural systems are actually always circular, with almost no waste accumulating. That means if a plant or an animal dies, it's being decomposed and broken down in the building blocks of life, and those building blocks of life help new life to emerge. And among the key species that drive this decomposition process that enables the circularity are filamentous fungi. And what I find extremely fascinating about them is that they can grow in nearly anything. So if you think of the most stable molecule found on Earth, or at least organic molecule, that is lignin, found in trees and gives the stiffness to wood, it can be broken down by fungi, but only by fungi. That's the only organism who cracked that code. And then if you think of stones, of solid rocks, they can be broken down by filamentous fungi to use the minerals and make them available to life. And I think this is really fascinating and highlights that they can grow on nearly anything. And that includes, of course, also the waste streams that derive from our food system. And therefore, they are potentially really helpful in creating more circular systems. However, if you think of fungi for food, you might think of white button mushrooms that you had recently for dinner, but you could also be thinking of soy sauce or beer or wine or bread, which are the products of fungal fermentations, some of which of single-celled fungi called yeast and others of filamentous fungi or molds. And the aromas of those products might give you an idea of the culinary potential of fungi in general. And on top of that, they grow, at least filamentous fungi, grow these hyphae that you can see here, or so-called filaments, and they can bind loose ingredients together and actually texturize them. And they can also form fibers that are similar to the fibers found in meat. So fungi can not only use waste streams, they can also create them, transform them into delicious products that can actually also replace animal-derived products, and thereby addressing the two major problems in our food system. But then coming back to the title of my talk, which was circling around biodiversity, if you think of the fungi we use currently for food production, there's not that many. It's like a few handful of fungi we use for food fermentation, and then there's a few thousand species of mushrooms, so the fruiting bodies of fungi that we consume, and they add up to this very thin yellow line that you can see up there. And then there is a few 100,000 species of fungi that are somewhat described to a certain degree, and that is this purple line that you can see next to it. And then there is this whole blue space, and that is the uncharacterized but estimated to exist amount of fungi that are out there in nature that we haven't characterized yet, and where we don't know anything about their potential. And just to illustrate a little bit the biodiversity, I brought some pictures from the lab. So this guy you might have eaten as camembert. This one you might have eaten as red rice. And this one you might have eaten as a meat replacement from corn. So there are different fungi. They look very different. They're beautiful. And you can do a lot of different things with them. And inspired by this potential, I co-founded a company where we developed a meat alternative based on fungal fermentation, and those are different dishes that we created from the first prototype. We also set up a lot of research projects at the university where we actually tried to explore the biodiversity of filamentous fungi for their ability to use side streams, for their ability to create textures and flavors, and we also tried to study their safety. And we are interested in using them for product development, for example, also in collaboration with Josh and Kim, who are both with us today, but also with the Alchemist Restaurant and Nabila, with whom we also collaborate. And here's a puff pastry that was created from fungal mycelium. So to summarize this point, exploring biodiversity of fungi for food fermentations might actually help us create more sustainable food systems for the future. But this is, for me, not the end of the story, because me as a scientist wanted to dive deeper into this. So I asked myself, how are fungi actually creating all these delicious flavors? So when fungi grow, they actually digest the substrates around them outside of their bodies. So they break down all the components around them into smaller pieces, and some of them, like free amino acids or free sugars, can actually be perceived by humans as umami compounds or as sweet compounds. And then if they take up those compounds and grow, they also have end products of their metabolism, and those are often acids, organic acids. They can again be perceived by us as sour compounds. But then there are more delicate and complex aromas that are actually actively produced by the fungi. And I found it really fascinating because the purpose of the production of these molecules is oftentimes communication. So far we only talked about individual fungi, but building on the talks beforehand and seeing them as holobionts, you might actually agree that individuals do not exist in nature. We are never alone. We are always embedded in a network of many other organisms, especially other microorganisms, and so are fungi. Just to give you an example what that means in terms of flavor, think of truffles. So you might think of these lovely aromas of truffles, but they're actually not generated by the truffle fungus, but actually only generated in the association with its bacteria that sit on top of the truffle, and just in this communication and interplay between the truffle and its bacteria, the truffle aromas are produced. And this might actually also be true in many fermented foods. And to me, this is an extremely, fascinating idea that that we can actually use our senses to dive into this world of microorganisms and to listen to the invisible, and actually to listen to the hidden dramas and conversations of microorganisms by consuming fermented foods. So for me, biodiversity is not only important to create new starter cultures, but also biodiversity within fermented foods holds great potential, because through the collaboration and communication between microbes in those fermented foods, we actually create more delicious and interesting complex flavors. As we heard before, microbes are fundamental to everything, so having more diversity of microbes is also value in itself. And then if we talk about human health, they are also indispensable to our lives in many different ways. And as you heard before, we all have a microbiome with all the microorganisms associated with our bodies. And in the last decades, there was a huge decline in the diversity of microbes that are associated with us as a species. And interacting with many diverse microbes, for example, through fermented foods, might actually also come with many health benefits for us. And my last point is resilience, because if you think of a starter culture that is consisting, for example, of a single individual microorganism, compared to more like traditional ferments where you have a whole community of microorganisms present, the community will be much more resilient to, for example, pathogens entering or also changing conditions throughout the fermentation, because they occupy the niche much more and they have redundant functionality that you don't, or that you lose if you focus on a single species. So resilience is also really important, and I think this is also illustrating very well not only for microbial communities but also for human communities that diversity comes with resilience and that we should actually cherish and nurture that. So my second point is that biodiversity within the microbial communities in fermented foods is beneficial in terms of flavor production, human health, but also resilience of food production. And this brings me to my last point. As indicated before, industry oftentimes only uses 1 or 2 species to produce ferments such as beer or bread or yogurt, while in the traditional counterparts such as spontaneously fermented beers or sourdoughs or traditional yogurts, whole microbial communities can be found. And industry does this limitation or decomplexalization, simplification one could say, to ensure safety, but also to eliminate batch-to-batch variation and to have a predictable and stable production. But through the industrialization of these often or previously homemade food products, we lose a lot of connection to the world around us. And you've heard about this story now by David, but as Veronica indicated, I'm also kind of part of the scientific team elucidating what's going on with the microbes in this ant yogurt. And we actually found that there is carryover of, for example, the ants to the milk environment, carryover of microorganisms from the ant to the milk, and proliferation of those microorganisms that then results in yogurt. And we also recreated that in the lab, which is image C over there, and to study those effects in more detail. And what is fascinating to me is that Sevgi and David and Veronica reported that the practitioners of this cultural practice actually told them that the different yogurts that different families created could be told apart by the community depending on which cow gave their milk or which community member actually created the yogurt. And to me, this is really beautiful because that means we don't only listen to the microorganisms communicating, but we can also use our senses to listen to this origin history of a fermented food and all the individuals who contributed to it. And coming back to the idea of ecosystems, like I see basically that there is kind of this flow of nutrients and microorganisms between members of a community, and using our senses we can actually, or using kind of breathing and eating, we can actually connect ourselves to all these members of our communities. And it would be beautiful to cherish also the diversity found between different and diverse ferments, as we do, for example, for wine, where we actually cherish or celebrate the diversity in different tastes and flavor profiles, also in other fermented foods, by also acknowledging how they were produced and who contributed to their production. So my last point is diversity in fermented foods invites us to connect to the natural world around us. And this also brings me back to my initial point where I talked about the disconnect that I could feel between my own actions and modern, well, in general, modern life, one could say. And I think it is a very beautiful thought for me to use, for example, food as a way to reconnect to the environment and to the natural world around me. And I think there's huge potential in that because it's something that is delicious and joyful and people actually enjoy. And it's a positive way to interact with the world around you. And the more you feel connected to the world, the more you care, and the more you care, the more you protect and cherish and nourish the world around you. And this is very important to me. And I would like to close this talk with a picture from the New York Times that is representing our whole planet as one living organism, and I think that kind of highlights this interconnectivity. And finally, I would also like to thank all the collaborators on the different projects, and in particular, I would like to thank Luz, who's doing a lot of the fungal work in our lab, and then I'm highlighting all the people who are actually here today, which are Kim and Joshua, and Tiffany, and Veronica, Anna, Nabila, and David. And I would also like to highlight Sevgi, who contributed with the ethnographic work. And of course, I would also like to thank our funders. And thank you for your attention.